In this series of videos, we're going to talk about the inventory system in Sonar. What the inventory system is a way for you to track all of the inventory for your business, whether they're unique items, something with, say, a serial number or a MAC address, or generic items, things like spools of cable, boxes of screws, or tools. So you can see along the top we have three tabs, the first one being items. This is where we can see all of the items in our inventory system and add new ones. Categorization, this is where we break up the categories for our items, who manufactures it, what's the model, what category does it fall into, and finally assignees. And an assignee is just somewhere that we're going to put inventory. It could be a physical location like a warehouse, it could be in somebody's vehicle, it could be assigned to an employee or a customer or something like that. So we're going to start by setting up some assignees. We'll start with a location. So a location is going to be a physical location that we store inventory at. And so, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to set up a warehouse. And as you saw in the last videos, I've just entered some information. I've validated the address. It's dropped it on the map right here. And I'm going to go ahead and add this. So here's my first assignee in my warehouse. And you can see, as we saw in the last videos as well, everything's updating in real time in this inventory interface. I have all the logs coming in on the right here. Let's move on and set up a vehicle. So we would have a vehicle as an assignee if, for example, let's say we have a fleet of vehicles. I have 3 trucks, and these trucks are shared between different employees. I don't really know who's going to be driving which vehicle on which day. And I stock these vehicles with installation supplies. I put, I don't know, routers in there, cable modems. I put Ethernet cables and tools and things like that, and I want to know what's left in each vehicle. So let's set one up. We'll have truck 1. And you don't have to fill in all of this information here. This is really just for you to make it easier for you to track which one's which. So I'm going to say this is a Ford F-150. It's brand new. Everyone likes to drive this vehicle. And so let's add one more. We'll do, let's do a technical support vehicle. And this is Mini Cooper. It's a little older. Can't fit very much inventory in there. So the last one we're going to set up is a custom assignee. And the purpose of a custom assignee is it's when none of the other assignees fit. The assignees that we can have in Sonar would be an inventory location or a vehicle, 2 you've already seen. We can assign it to an employee. We can also assign it to a customer or a network site, and when a piece of inventory is assigned to a customer or a network site, we look at it as having been deployed. It's been installed, or it's been set up, or it's something like that. Whereas when it's in a warehouse, or it's in a vehicle, or it's with an employee, or something like that, we look at that as being undeployed. It has not been installed yet. It might be on its way to being installed, but it's not quite there. So a custom assignee is when we need an undeployed assignee that doesn't fit any of those other ones. And a good example here would be something like a contractor. I might give equipment to a contractor to install, and they might distribute it between their employees, but I don't really care which of their employees has it. That's not really my concern. My concern is I want to know how many radios did I give this contractor, or how many routers, or how much cable. So let's do that. Let's set up Joe's installation services. I can put a little note. And we're going to save that. So now I have 3 assignees. I have a physical location, I have a couple of vehicles, and I have a custom assignee. And depending on your needs, you may have a lot of locations and no vehicles, or you might have 1 location and 20 vehicles, and this is really up to you, whatever makes sense for your business. So let's move on to categorization. So in categorization, we're able to start creating specific item categories that we're going to create items within. So let's start with the Categories tab. Now, a model category is a grouping of inventoried items. I'll give you an example of some good categories. If you were a cable ISP, you'd probably have a category like cable modems. If you were a fixed wireless ISP, you'd probably have a category like CPE radios or customer radios. Or if you're a fiber ISP, you'd probably have something like GPON head-end equipment, or you might have ONTs or something like that. And so what you want to do with these categories is you want to create a category that's broad enough that it's going to have more than 1 or 2 items in it, but specific enough that when you are told what the category is, you can immediately determine what kind of items it holds. And the reason this is important is we're going to use these categories later on. As we get into things like provisioning and network monitoring, we're going to be tying other things to these categories. And so just think about that as you set this up. I'm going to set up a couple here. I'm going to do CPE routers. This is going to be for my business, the routers that I install at the customer premise. I'm going to have installation supplies. I'm going to put things in there like pre-cut Ethernet cables, RJ45Ns, things like that that I might use at a site. And I'm going to have, let's see, I'll have wireless CPE. So that works. I've got 3 categories in here that make reasonable sense. Can probably make at least a good guess, if not a pretty well-informed guess, about what kind of items I have in there if you knew the kind of equipment that I used. So let's go ahead and set up some of that. So I'm going to move over to manufacturers and models. What we want to create here is different manufacturers that I purchase equipment from, and then the models that they produce. So let's start by setting up some manufacturers. In my neck of the woods, there's a well-known networking equipment manufacturer called Frisco. I've also got one I buy firewalls from called Juniper. And I buy all my cables from a manufacturer called Cables R Us. And then all of my wireless equipment is made by a company called Ubiquity. So now I've set up my manufacturers. I have 4 of them listed here. Again, you see these coming up in the logs over on the right. But we don't have any models yet. If I try to add any items, I wouldn't be able to yet because we haven't created any models. So let's move on to doing that. So when we create a model, we first pick a category. I'm going to start by setting up a CPE router made by Frisco. So I'm going to pick them here. Now I need a name for this router. So this is typically going to be the actual model name of the item you're adding. Now if this is something very generic, like a hammer, you might just put hammer in here, right? Or if this is something like a cordless drill, you might put the model name, you might put cordless drill, and you'd be able to figure it out from the manufacturer. You generally want to be as specific as you can here. You don't really want there to be a lot of questions when people are looking at your inventory as to what's what. You should be able to identify that very easily. So the model of router that I purchase here is the Generi router ABC123. And you can see down below here we can set up some fields. So if we don't have any fields on a model, we treat it as generic. A field is a way of uniquely identifying an item. So if I was to go back to the previous example, adding something like a hammer in here, I probably wouldn't have any fields. I don't really care about one hammer from another. If I give you one of my hammers, I just care that I only have one left. I don't really care which one you took. However, in the case of something like a router, I probably do care. There's probably something on it like a serial number or a MAC address that I want to track. And again, this is going to tie into other things. This is going to tie into things like provisioning. When we get to setting up provisioned equipment, if we're running a DHCP network, we're going to use the MAC addresses on this item to assign DHCP. If we're running a radius network, we're going to be assigning information onto this equipment. If this is an LTE network, there's going to be information on our SIM cards that we want to track here to do provisioning and that kind of thing. So just be aware of that as you're setting this up. You want to make sure, think about, in our next series of videos, we're going to go into things like provisioning. Think about what information you're going to need on your equipment to do that provisioning. So let's go ahead and set up some fields. I'm going to say for this router, all I want to track is a MAC address. And I want it to be required. When people are adding this type of equipment, I want them to always enter the MAC. And I want it to be unique. A MAC address is always unique. And so I want to make sure that they're being uniquely entered. So in the field name, I'm going to type MAC address. And then I can pick the type of field this is here. We have 6 different types. We have text. This just allows you to enter any kind of text whatsoever. You can enter a number. This has to be a round number, like 1, 100, or 1000. It can't be 100.83. If we do a decimal, now it can have a decimal in it. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to have a decimal. It can be a round number, but then we could have 10, 100, 1000, or we could have 100.83. can have a MAC address, which is what's relevant in my case. I want this to be formatted as a MAC address, so I'm going to set this field to be a MAC address. Now, last couple we have here, we have a regular expression. If you don't know what these are, I wouldn't worry about it too much. You can go and Google them, but it's really just a very simple way for you to set up a pattern that the field has to match in order to pass. So, to give you a specific example, if these items had a serial number that always began with an A, and then it was 3 digits, and then 3 letters, we could write a regular expression that would make that the enforced type of data that gets entered into that field. Lastly, we have an IMSI. If you run any kind of LTE network, you probably know what this is, but it's a unique number that's on a SIM card that allows you to identify the SIM card on a network. And this is commonly used. When we get into doing provisioning, this is going to be used for provisioning LTE networks. So I'm going to set this to MAC address because I'm entering a MAC address. And I'm going to add this with one field. Now you see I have my model up here underneath the manufacturer. So let's add a couple more quick. So I have another one I install. This is going to be a firewall that I install at customer prem. And again, we're going to have a MAC address. But I think for this one as well, we'll also have a serial number. And so for these firewalls, I know my serial numbers are always numeric. They don't have any letters in them, so I'm going to set this to number. Okay, let's add a couple more. So let's do a wireless CPE. And these guys make a piece of wireless CPE called wireless biscuits. And what we're going to add here is a MAC address. We're going to add a serial number. And again, with this, I know this is always a number. We're going to add the number of chocolate chips. And we're going to add the weight in kilograms. I'm going to make that a decimal because we want to be able to track that more specifically. Now you can see some of these are not very realistic, but I'm adding these in here so I can show you, as we move into adding items, how it works when we have 1 field or 2 fields or 4 fields or none. So the last thing I'm going to add is a generic item. We're going to add an Ethernet cable, and I'm going to put that into Cables Are Us. So that's going to go into installation supplies. And let's say this is a 5-foot blue Cat5e cable. Okay, so this is some good initial setup. We've got some assignees set up. I have my warehouse, I have a couple of vehicles, and I have a custom assignee. We set up some categories to put our inventory into, and we created some manufacturers and models. So in the next video, we're going to go through and actually start adding some items. I'm going to show you how you can easily search for specific items and filter them, and then we're going to move on to assigning them onto accounts and network sites.